Okay, we're ready to go. Start with the salutation to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Today is June 1st, 2013. Okay, good morning, everybody. Well, we're in June already. It seems like about 3 weeks ago we were ending up the December section, and now already it's June. Okay, so today we'll be taking Sutta number 97 in the Majjhima Nikaya. And then this is going to be, I'm going to use this sutta as a kind of takeoff point for looking at a number of other suttas in the Majjhima Nikaya which deal with the set of qualities that are grouped together, sometimes called the Four Immeasurables, Se Uliang Shin, and also sometimes called the Four Brahma-Viharas, Se Fanju. Is that expression used in Chinese? Is that the expression that's used in Chinese? Se Fanju. Okay, so this sutta begins, well, it primarily concerns Sariputta, the venerable Sariputta. So it begins at a time when the Buddha was living at Rajgir in the bamboo grove. And so on this occasion, the venerable Sariputta was traveling in the southern hills. This is a group of hills to the south of Rajagaha, together with a large community of monks. Okay, then a certain monk who had spent the rainy season at Rajagaha came to Venerable Sariputta, exchanged greetings with him, and then the Venerable Sariputta asked him, is the Blessed One, the Buddha, well and strong? So he says, the Buddha is well and strong. Is the Sangha of monks well and strong? This monk says, the Sangha of monks is also well and strong. Then Sariputta says, there is a Brahmin named Dhananjani living at the Tandupala gate. Is that Brahmin Dhananjali well and strong? And this monk then says, the Brahmin Dhananjali too is well and strong. Now, it's said that before Sariputta was ordained as a Buddhist monk, he had been a friend of this Brahmin named Dhananjani. So that's why he's concerned about his well-being. Okay, so then Sariputta asks, is he diligent or heedful, friend? Which means, is he leading an upright life, a virtuous life? So then this monk says, how could he be diligent? Or in other words, he's saying, he's certainly not a diligent, friend. He plundered. This sounds just like it came out of a news report, last week or so. he plunders Brahmin householders in the name of the king, and he plunders the king in the name of the Brahmin householders. This mayor is robbing the treasury in the name of the federal government, or he's robbing the local treasury in the name of the federal government, and he's stealing from the federal government in the name of the local government. Okay, his wife, who is faithful, that is, who had been a devout Buddhist and came from a clan with faith, has died, and he has taken another wife, a woman without faith, who comes from a clan without faith. It seems to be implying that they have faith in the Buddha and the Buddha's teaching. So perhaps more generally, it just means that his previous wife was devoted to Dharma in the quite broad general sense of the shared Indian Dhamma, belief in the value of generosity, observing sila or the moral precepts, having devotion to the renunciants and supporting renunciants. Okay, so this is a report about Sariputta's old friend. And so when Sariputta hears this, he's somewhat disturbed by this news. And he says that this is bad news that we hear about the Brahmin Dhananjani. Perhaps sometime in the near future, I might have a chance to meet him and have a little discussion with him in order to give him some advice or an admonition in order to re-establish him in the virtuous practices. Okay, so then Sariputta spends some time in the southern hills, and then gradually he goes on a tour in the direction of Rajagaha. And so eventually he arrives at Rajagaha, and then, now coming over to paragraph 4, one day, taking his bowl and his extra robe, he goes into Rajagaha for alms. And then he approaches the Brahmin Dhananjani, who has been milking the cows. And when Sariputta comes to him, Dhananjani, the Brahmin, offers him some fresh milk, asking him to drink some of this fresh milk until it is time for the meal. But Sariputta refuses this and then says, I have finished my meal for today, and I shall be dwelling at the root of a tree, and you may come there. It's a little bit strange that Sariputta doesn't just immediately begin a conversation with the Brahmin Dhananjani. Could there be some reason why he doesn't begin immediately by admonishing the Brahmin, but tells him, I'll be staying at the foot of that tree. You can come there whenever you want. Richard? If there's a mobile microphone, please take that.
Not behaving like a Brahmin. And secondly, when he's saying, you can come visit me, that's implying generally that he is superior to Dhananjani, because normally supplicants and constituents and so on go to do darshan at the houses of their superiors. It's customary, say in India and in Nepal, for people to appear at the houses of important persons, to ask for favors, to ask if there's something they can do for them, and so on, or in the morning. And the person who goes to the other person's house is normally of lower status than the person who receives the visit.
What is your name?
Michael.
Oh, you're Michael. I'm sorry, because I didn't have my distance class. Okay.
Oh, now I'm Michael. Okay. I want to suggest also the possibility that it gives the Brahmin an opportunity to display the fact that he's going to be receptive to what Sariputta has to say, whether or not that's true. But that's the way it struck me.
Yeah, that's actually the thought that I had in mind. From the sutta itself doesn't say it doesn't give any reason for Sariputta sort of withdrawing to the foot of a tree. But I was thinking of that rather than the reasons that Richard offered. I'm trying to think. If Sariputta was going, you see that there's a practice which is allowed by Buddhist monks, that they can impose on a lay person if they feel that the lay person is in some way doing things that are harmful to the Buddha's teaching, or to the Sangha, or behaving disrespectfully. They can do this practice. It's called turning the bowl upside down, which means that they don't actually physically turn the bowl upside down, but they refuse to accept alms from a lay person. Usually it's a Sangha decision, a group decision. In fact, in 2007, in Burma, the Burmese monks, the younger monks, they had made this decision not to turn the bowl upside down with regard to the generals in the military junta.
Well, yeah, it's a general customary rule in the areas. For instance, what made Gandhi's fasting so powerful?
Yeah.
That is, he was effectively turning the bowl upside down when he was
Yeah.
eating food.
Yeah.
Saying the country isn't behaving, I can't eat.
Yeah. Yeah, but in this case, I don't think Sariputta is doing that, rejecting the Brahmin's offer of milk as a kind of moral, what do you call this, boycott of him. I think it's just, the fact is that he has already taken his food for the day, and now he's satisfied with that. But I think the reason why he's withdrawing to the foot of the tree rather than immediately admonishing the Brahmin is, I think, first by showing up at the Brahmin's house, he's sort of suggesting, aha, I know what you've been up to. I know that you haven't been behaving properly. But rather than start admonishing him and sort of laying a heavy trip on him, becoming moralistic, by withdrawing, he's in a sense giving the Brahmin time to reflect back upon himself and to think, am I going to be open and receptive to what Sariputta has to say, even though it'll involve some criticism of my behavior. That's the way I would understand it, though there's no explanation given in the text itself. When I was a kid, my sister had to start to wear glasses, and we used to tease her. 4 eyes, 4 eyes. Now, you could all get together and start teasing. Bhante is 6 eyes, 6 eyes. Okay, so the Brahmin, after he eats his breakfast, then he goes to the Venerable Sariputta and they exchange the typical courtesies. Then Sariputta asks him, it's a kind of loaded question. He says, are you diligent, Dhananjani? And then the Brahmin answers, just like any small town or even big time politician today, he says, how can we be diligent, Sariputta, when we have to support our parents, our wife and kids, and our slaves, servants, and workers, when we have to do our duty towards our friends and companions, kinsmen and relatives, towards guests, departed ancestors, the deities, the king, and when this body, or I myself, must also be refreshed and nourished. Okay, then Sariputta is going to give the Brahmin a quite stern, but a very simple and direct argument against his attempt to justify his misbehavior. So he says, suppose someone here were to behave contrary to the Dharma, to behave unrighteously for the sake of his parents. Okay, then because of such behavior, when he dies, then he gets reborn in hell, and then the wardens of hell drag him off to hell. Okay, and then he comes before, this is in the typical picture of what happens, sort of metaphorically, after one dies, one comes before Yama, the god Yama, who is considered the protective deity of hell. Or actually he is the deity of the dead, who questions the judge of the dead, who doesn't pass judgment on the dead, but asks them about their own behavior. And then the way they answer, they have to answer truthfully, and it's their reports about their own behavior that will determine their own destiny after death. So in this case, we can imagine that this person is dragged off and comes before Yama. And so when Yama asks him, why did you misbehave? Why did you violate the basic precepts? So he says, it was because of my parents, because I want to look after my parents, that I behaved contrary to the Dhamma, contrary to the basic moral law. And so then he says, please don't let the wardens of hell drag me off to hell. Or would his parents, if his parents were brought onto the scene as witnesses, suppose the parents were to say, please don't drag him off to hell, because it's for our sake that he behaved immorally or unrighteously. So would this be possible? And then the Brahmin says, no, Sariputta, even while he was crying out, the wardens of hell would still fling him into hell. So in other words, how would we justify or sort of explain the point of this very briefly, very concisely? Putting it in a kind of generalization, making a generalization out of it. Okay, think about it. We'll just go through the next section. Okay, so now we have an expansion of the same argument. Okay, suppose someone here were to behave contrary to the Dhamma or the moral law, to behave unrighteously for the sake of his wife and children, for the sake of slaves, servants, and workers, for the sake of friends and companions, for the sake of kinsmen and relatives, for the sake of guests, for the sake of the departed ancestors, for the sake of deities, making offerings to the deities, for the sake of the king, for the sake of refreshing and nourishing himself. Okay, and so then the wardens of hell were to drag him off to hell, to bring him in front of King Yama. Okay, so would he be able to free himself by pleading thus? It was for the sake of, supporting my own life, maintaining myself, that I behaved immorally and unrighteously. And then others were to come to his defense and saying it was for the sake, here they're using the same appeal, it was for the sake of refreshing and nourishing himself that he behaved immorally, unrighteously. So please don't carry him off to hell. Then the Brahmin answers, no, Sariputta, even while he was crying out, the wardens of hell would fling him into hell. Okay, so what kind of generalization can we draw from this? Claudia? Claudia, okay.
That good intentions don't outweigh bad action? Or
Okay, that's
bad.
exactly the point. Yeah, even though the intentions might seem to be good, but they're not a justification for breaking the basic principles or precepts of morality. Of course, sometimes there can be conflicts of moral obligations. Suppose it was a matter of, I think probably most of you or many of you have read Les Miserables, the novel by Victor Hugo, or at least seen the play or the movie, or the basic story. Jean Valjean, who's the hero of the novel. This is a time when there's great poverty in France. And I think it was his sister and her children were really extremely hungry. And so he broke the window, broke into a bakery and stole some loaves of bread in order to feed his sister and her children. And because of this, he was caught by the police and then condemned to hard labor in prison for something like 7 years. Okay, in a situation where there is extreme, desperation, could we say that stealing the loaf of bread of course it's breaking the precepts. But would it create an unwholesome karma of a weight that could even justify being imprisoned for 7 years, not to speak of going to hell? Yeah, okay, take.
What about allowing your family to starve to death rather than taking a loaf of bread? Would that get you to hell?
I would say, in this case, allowing the family to starve to death rather than making that decision to break a precept would be, in my opinion, we won't speak about rebirth in hell, but it would be a heavier moral transgression than breaking the precept in order to...
Right, well, isn't that, without the metaphor of hell, isn't that the relevant answer? The question is whether breaking the rule one way is going to result in more demerit than doing the opposite.
Yeah.
And if you can answer no, then obviously you don't really believe that the rule is absolute in that sense.
Yeah. I have questions about the absolute, the idea of absolutely obligatory, absolutely binding moral principles. I think moral principles have to be considered in the light of context and situations.
Yeah, there was, I don't remember the name of the book, but a researcher who studies moral psychology did a whole study on, I think one of the first examples he used was with somebody whose wife needed medication and didn't have access to the medication, and he maybe broke into a pharmacy. And then what he did was he studied all of the rationales and the explanations. So the moral reasoning was sort of where the judgment might be, rather than the intention and the action itself, the reasoning behind it.
Yeah. Okay, we'll take one more comment. Okay, no, we'll take your comment. Richard, go ahead.
Well, it's a question of the level of abstraction in which the rule is stated. If you say that that what's good is to preserve or promote life, and that the preservation of property rights has some role in that. It's not absolute.
I agree with
you.
I agree with that. And then just to take another like extreme counterexample against the idea of absolutely binding moral principles. The classical example in Nazi Germany, where the SS is out to capture the Jews, and so there will be some Germans, families that hide Jews in their basement or in the attic. So when the SS come around asking, are there any Jews here? So the family who's protecting them will say, no, I haven't seen any. So speaking falsehood in order to save the lives of these innocent people. But anyway, my assumption would be that the situation which is being described in this passage is not where Dhananjani's parents are in a desperate plight, where their lives hinge upon where their lives are dependent upon him breaking the precept in order to get some wealth to give to them. But rather we could imagine that he is maybe building a nice comfortable mansion for them, or buying them a new 30-inch television set, or buying a new set of furniture, Swedish white oak furniture, whatever. Okay, and then also I think maybe also the descriptive terms here, contrary to the Dhamma behaving unrighteously, it's not saying anything actually about observing specific precepts, but what is the conduct that accords with Dhamma or with righteousness. Okay, so the Buddha continues his questions. Sariputta continues the questions. He says, who is better, one who for the sake of his parents behaves contrary to the Dhamma, behaves unrighteously, or one who for the sake of his parents behaves according to the Dhamma, behaves righteously? Okay, so Dhananjani replies, one who for the sake of his parents behaves contrary to the Dhamma and so on is worse. The one who for the sake of his parents behaves in accordance with the Dhamma is better. Okay, so then Sariputta tells him that there are other kinds of work profitable and in accordance with the Dhamma, by means of which one can support one's parents and at the same time both avoid doing evil and practice merit. So I think this is the key passage which resolves that apparent moral dilemma. So what Dhananjani has probably been doing is maybe siphoning off wealth over which he has stewardship in order to give it to his parents, or exploiting others, maybe not paying his workers in order to take the wealth and give it to his parents. And so he's violating basic moral precepts in order to support his parents, but at the same time, as Sariputta points out, that there are other kinds of work that he could do. So he's not in a situation where Either he behaves dishonestly, or his parents have to suffer in misery. But he can do some other kind of work which is honest, upright, virtuous, earn enough to support his parents, and by doing this kind of righteous work, he'll be avoiding evil and practicing merit. Practicing merit both by observing right livelihood and then acquiring righteous wealth in order to do other deeds of merit. Okay, so then Sariputta follows through the same questionnaire with regard to the other people who are in some way dependent upon Dhananjani, his wife and children and so forth, right down to supporting himself, his own body. And so, the end of paragraph 25, Sariputta sums it up and says there are other kinds of work profitable in accordance with the Dharma, by means of which one can support yourself, refresh and nourish your own body, and at the same time both avoid doing evil and practicing merit. Okay, so then when Sariputta had given this advice, this admonition to the Brahmin Dhananjani, the Brahmin left him, and then after some time Sariputta must have gotten up and returned to the monastery in Rajagaha, the Bamboo Grove Monastery. Apparently, my assumption is that the Brahmin Dhananjani accepted Sariputta's advice and changed his way of life. Okay, sometime later, we don't know how much later, the Brahmin Dhananjani became seriously ill, and so he sent a messenger to the monastery, to the Blessed One, paying his respects to the Blessed One, and then asking the Buddha to send Sariputta to see him out of compassion. Okay, so the messenger fulfills his duty, and then Sariputta comes to visit the Brahmin. Apparently the Brahmin is probably lying on a bed, which it turns out is going to be his deathbed. Okay, so Sariputta comes to the Brahmin, exchanges pleasantries with him, then asks the Brahmin whether he's getting better, and the Brahmin in section 29 says, "I'm not getting better, I'm not comfortable, my painful feelings are increasing." And then he uses a number of stock similes that we find elsewhere in the suttas to describe his pain. It says as if a strong man was splitting open his head with a sharp sword, as if a strong man had tied a headband around his head and pulled with tough leather strap and pulling on that strap, or as if a skilled butcher had carved up the belly of an ox with a sharp knife. Okay, so this is like the pain that the Brahmin is experiencing. And so Sariputta must realize at this point that the Brahmin is soon going to pass away. And so now he wants to direct the Brahmin's mind to a suitable realm of rebirth. And so he uses a kind of questionnaire. I'm in paragraph 30 now. He asks the Brahmin, what is better, hell or the animal realm? The Brahmin says the animal realm. Which is better, the animal realm or the realm of the pretas, the spirits? So the realm of the pretas is better. Which is better, the realm of the pretas or the human realm? The Brahmin says the human realm. So which is better, human beings or the gods of the four great kings? the gods belonging to the heaven of the four great kings. We go in sequence here. I don't read each exchange. So the heaven of the four great kings, then we come to the Tavatingsa, the heaven of the 33, then the Yamadevas, then the Tusita Devas, the gods of the Tusita heaven, then the gods who delight in creating, and then the gods who wield power over the creations of others. So what has been going on here is a kind of survey of the different realms of existence according to the Buddhist cosmology. And from the dialogue, it seems that this picture of the universe is shared by both Sariputta as a Buddhist and the Brahmin. So we could suppose perhaps the Brahmins don't have exactly the same cosmology, but there would have been some similarities. So we don't know, the exact words of the dialogue. Maybe Sariputta would have been using the words that would have been familiar to the Brahmin from the typical Brahmin cosmology. But because this is coming down as a Buddhist text, it would have been transposed into the words or the concepts of the Buddhist cosmology. But if we take a kind of overview of this Buddhist cosmology, we see that there are three realms which constitute what are called in the Buddhist scheme the Dugati, or the Apaya. These are the three bad realms. Apaya, I usually translate as the plane of misery, and Dugati as the bad destinations. And so the three bad destinations, which are the results of heavy, unwholesome karma, are the hells, the animal realm, and the world of the pretas, sometimes translated hungry ghosts, or I prefer afflicted spirits. These are beings who they're somewhat in proximity to the human world, though invisible to us, and they suffer various kinds of affliction, not as severe, nowhere nearly as severe as in the hells, but they often depicted as undergoing strong hunger and thirst, which they can't satisfy. So those are the three bad destinations. Then we come to the Sukati, which are the good destinations. Those are the good destinations or the happy destinations in the sensual sphere of existence. And we have 7 of these realms. The one that we're most familiar with is the human realm. Most familiar with the one that we live in ourselves is the human realm. But then in Buddhist cosmology, there are 6 heavenly realms depicted as existing above the human realm, superior to the human existence in some respects. We don't have to go into the details of them. One is called the heaven of the 4 great kings. There are 4 divine kings who rule over this heaven, and each has his own compartment, his own division within this heaven. Then comes the Tavatingsa, the heaven of the 33, which is presided over by Sakra, or Indra, the lord of the gods. Then come the Yama gods, of which very little is said in the Buddha's texts. Then comes the Tusita heaven, the heaven of delight. This is where the Bodhisattva lives before he takes rebirth in the human realm. It's where the next Buddha, Maitreya or Maitreya, is supposed to be living now. And many of the Buddha's own lay disciples, or as some of them, are depicted as taking rebirth in Tusita, like Anathapindika, Visakha. The Buddha's own mother, when she passed away, she was reborn in Tusita. Then come the gods who delight in creation, creating. Again, not much is said about them. In my picture, that this is the heavenly realm where we get Mozart and Bach and Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci, the great artists and musicians are reborn there. Then above that is the gods who wield power over others' creations. That is the heavens for the editors and the film producers, the people who create the companies, like the music record. Do we have records anymore? The music labels, or who construct the museums that purchase the works of art. But that's my own conception. Okay, so these are the 6 heavens of the sensual sphere. And so Sariputta, we could say, has been guiding the Brahmin Dhananjani to directing his mind to each of these heavens. Okay, so now Sariputta takes another step. In paragraph 31, he says, what do you think is better? What is better? The gods who wield power over others' creations, or the Brahma-world? Okay, so this is the Brahma-loka. And now above the sense sphere heavens, there is an entirely different realm of existence, which is sometimes summed up just under the label, the Brahma-world. Now the 7 good destinations of the sense sphere, those are the fruits or results of good, wholesome karma of an ordinary kind. Some of it is extraordinary, but the kind of karma which is created by generosity, observing precepts, maybe the lower stages of meditation. But when one develops the meditation to higher or superior levels of deep samadhi, that creates a kind of affinity of the mind with the realm of existence beyond the sensuous sphere. It creates the karmic formation that leads to rebirth into the Brahma-world. And so now Sariputta has directed the mind of Dhananjani to the Brahma-world. Okay, and so when Sariputta mentions the Brahma-world, then the Brahman becomes delighted, because this was the aspiration of the Brahmins, the way they're depicted in the Buddhist texts. Their ideal, their aim, is to be reborn in the Brahma-world and to come into the company to live in communion with the Lord of the Brahma-world, who is called Mahabrahma, the great deity, almost like the God of Christianity. So when Sariputta mentions the Brahma-world, then Dhananjani is delighted, because that was probably his great wish or aspiration. So then Sariputta thinks, these Brahmins are devoted to the Brahma-world. Suppose I teach the Brahmin Dhananjani the path to the Brahma-world, or it's called the path to the company of Brahma, the way to come into the company of Brahma the Great. Okay, so now Sariputta starts to teach the path to the company of Brahma. So he teaches, I'm in paragraph 32, here a monk, or it could be anyone, dwells pervading one quarter with a mind imbued with loving kindness, so the second quarter, the third, the fourth, above, below, around, and everywhere. To everyone as to himself, he abides pervading the entire world with a mind of loving kindness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility, without ill will. This is the path to the company of Brahma. And then he repeats the same thing with the other three qualities that constitute the path to the Brahma world. That is the mind of boundless compassion, the mind of altruistic joy, the mind of equanimity. So these are the four states. Most often they're grouped together, and they're called sometimes the four immeasurables, the four uppamanya. Also called the four Brahma-Vihara, the dwelling places of Brahma. And so these four qualities, they seem to be somewhat similar, but usually we make a distinct, or at least some of them seem to be similar, but we make a subtle distinction, or there are subtle differences between them. And so we distinguish them by saying that loving kindness, we'll write these four qualities down. Most of you probably know them. Metta, or loving kindness, its distinguishing feature is the wish for the welfare and happiness of all beings, oneself and others. So that is its characteristic. And so metta of the four, metta is usually developed first because this loving kindness is the basis for the others. It's through developing this loving kindness, this feeling of empathy with others, sharing with others their wish for their own well-being and happiness, that one can develop the other Brahma-Viharas. And so then karuna, or compassion, has the quality of feeling the suffering of others as one's own, and wishing to eliminate or alleviate the suffering of others. So when one has true love and a feeling of kindness for others, then when one sees others undergoing suffering, then one wants them to be free from suffering, and one generates the wish for them to be free from suffering. Then mudita, altruistic joy. The word mudita originally simply meant joy, but it takes on a more specialized meaning in this context. The meaning of, I translated altruistic joy. This means rejoicing in the success, the good fortune of others, or rejoicing in the virtues and good qualities of others. And then the fourth Brahma-vihara, or fourth divine